Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data, but there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Julie Pham, PhD, the founder and CEO of CuriosityBased and the author of the Amazon bestseller, 7 Forms of Respect, a guide to transforming your communication and relationships at work. This week, our conversation is about LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum in Washington State, authentic disability representation in HOP, updated federal forms, and much more. That is a mouthful. Julie, welcome to the show. Thank you so
Bern-
much for joining.
Bernadette, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Why don't you just tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so I'm based in Seattle, Washington. I founded Curiosity Base in the middle of the pandemic in 2021. So we're going into our fourth year. And we help organizations who want to invest in relationship building and practicing curiosity at work.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Well, talk a little bit about your book. I love the title. So tell folks a little bit about sort of the thesis
Yes.
of your book.
So 7 forms of respect. If you are familiar with the 5 love languages, you can kind of think about it a bit that way. That we can agree on how respect feels
Hmm.
to be acknowledged, seen, heard. And
Yeah.
yet what we disagree about is, what does it look like? Bernadette, what does it look like to you versus what does it look like to me? Do you want me to CC
Hmm.
you on all the emails or not? Right?
Right.
Do you
Yeah.
want me to read all the prep? Do you want me to do all the prep work, or it doesn't really matter? That's just optional. And
Hmm.
so how we think how we think about respect can differ, and yet we talk about respect as if it's fixed and universal. People
Hmm.
just say, "Oh, be respectful." And we actually think of respect as dynamic, relative, subjective, and also contradictory.
Oh, interesting. Tell me a little bit more about what contradictory respect is.
Bernadette, do you always do everything that you say you will?
No, no, I try
Right?
to, but realistically, no.
Right, and that's what makes it contradictory, because we as humans are contradictory, and it just helps us
Right.
explain, "Oh, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing right now," because respect is actually the way that we express it and expect to get it.
Mm.
Is it really depends on the context. And so a big misconception that people have when they hear the title 7 Forms of Respect is they think
Mhm.
it's, "Oh, this is gonna teach me how to be respectful." They think of it like
Yeah.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
Sure.
right? And and it is not training on how to be respectful, because I believe everyone already knows how to be respectful, and the intention is to be
Um,
respectful. It's
mm,
actually about, how do we get curious about respect? How do we get curious? And I think of curiosity as actually as a practice. A lot of people talk about it like it's a personality trait. You either have it or you
mhm.
don't. I think of it as a practice, something we do, and it comes down to 3 elements. First is self-awareness, the second is relationship building, and the third is clear communication.
Mm,
So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, how do I want respect? And what's that based on? That's actually the self-awareness part.
mm.
Mhm.
Interesting. Huh. Well, I share your value of curiosity. It's one of my company's core values. So I definitely appreciate that. And I love that you're sort of framing it in that way. Interesting. Huh. Wow. You've gotten me thinking,
Yeah.
Julie. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I mean, and I think that it actually, sometimes in DI work, we get tied up between intention and impact and what
Right.
matters more, right? And I actually think the only difference between good intentions and bad intentions is if I like you or not, right?
Sure,
Right?
that's
Because it's
fair.
like 2 people could do the exact same thing, but I like one person, I don't like the other person. I have
Right.
trust with one person, I don't trust the other person.
Mhm.
have assigned different intentions,
Right.
even though they've done the same thing. And
Right.
with some forms of respect, we want to actually go to a place of what was the intention, and
Huh.
rather than good or bad, which often means, oh, I'm going to assign it something and then walk away. It's just actually let's learn from one another. And I think oftentimes people talk about. I actually think that there's a difference between disrespect and lack of respect.
Okay.
And so disrespect, and when we don't get respect in the way that we want, we can often describe it as I've been disrespected.
Sure.
And I think of disrespect as intentional. Bernadette, I know
Mhm.
you don't like that. And I did it anyway.
Okay.
That's disrespect.
Okay.
Lack of respect in the forms that matter to me is when maybe Bernadette, you told me it was okay when I did that. You told me I keep coming late to meetings and you're like, it's not a big deal, Julie. It's okay. And yet inside you're seething.
Mm.
And
Right.
so I'm not I'm give it's a lack of respect in the forms that matter to you, and maybe you've actually told me it was okay.
Right.
So
I've
we have
so
to kind of pause and
mm,
just ask ourselves if we're not being treated the way that we want to be treated, how much of that has to do with that being intentional versus that's just a lack of awareness. And I want to be really, really clear. I'm not talking about things that are illegal.
right.
Right.
Fair
Right, and
enough.
sometimes people are like, "No, no, that's assault or that's bullying or that's again," that's I'm not talking about that. That's not even just in the disrespectful category.
Right.
That's just against the rules. I'm talking about there are a lot of things that are actually quite in the gray area.
Okay, yeah. I think that makes sense. Huh. Well, folks, you got to check out Julie's book. I'm very curious. Absolutely, and I know that I can't wait to learn more about the 7 forms of respect. Julie, can you tell folks a little bit about what's giving you hope these days in the work that you're doing?
I think that more people, as much as there is, uh polarization, I think that there's also a desire. I'm seeing people want to connect, want
Yeah.
to learn from one another. It's in these individual ways though.
Yeah.
And so there's all this media on the outside, and yet once people have conversations with one another, I mean, I love guiding people through the process of self-discovery. And then
Sure.
once they're able to discover and learn things about themselves, then they're actually willing to learn about their colleagues more, and that's what gives me joy. That's what gives me hope.
Yeah. Well, you talk about self-awareness earlier as a form of curiosity or the first step, right? So
Yes, inward curiosity.
inward curiosity, yeah.
Mhm,
Interesting, yeah, I think that that's true. I definitely have found that. I mean, I think that as a society, we are generally lonely people, and we
mhm,
know that you and I know that we're wired for connection, and I think that we are starting to see more people be more curious and know that we've been staying in our lane for too long, and it's time to really outwardly connect across differences, and I think that's a really key takeaway. And actually, I spoke about this at a conference recently at the DFW Inclusion Conference. And prior to my talk, one of my friend Kelvin Goss, he challenged us when he was speaking to get into good trouble. Now, good
mhm,
trouble was the challenge set forth by the late great Congressman John Lewis, who's a legend. He fought with Dr. King for civil rights. And he said, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America. And that was what Kelvin was challenging us to do. And I wrote about that in this week's 5 Things because I was inspired by how Kelvin reinterpreted this message
mhm,
for us. And I think a lot of what he's encouraging us to do, in just a second, I'll tell you what he said. I think it requires curiosity. I think it requires that level of understanding and that willingness to have self awareness. So Kelvin said, speak up for inclusion and equity,
mhm,
challenge bias, educate others, create allies, and lead by example. I mean, none of this comes easy. None of
mhm,
this it happens by accident, right? And so it requires intention, it requires curiosity. So I don't know. I was inspired by that, and it sort of tied together.
Yes, absolutely. And one other thing that's giving me hope is more people are talking about how important it is, and that
Yeah.
loneliness is a public health epidemic.
Yeah.
That they're not just thinking about it as, "Oh, this is something soft to have." No, it actually does have it has physical consequences on us
Yeah.
if we don't try to foster inclusion and curiosity and build relationships.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what Kelvin was talking about is about requires building relationships, right? So it all connects.
Mhm.
It all connects. All right, well, let's get into this week's good vibes. The first story this week is about LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum in Washington State. Washington became the first state in the or the let's back up. Washington state in the US has taken a big step forward by passing a law requiring LGBTQ plus inclusive curricula in public schools. It is the seventh state to do so. So, this law ensures that students will learn about the histories, contributions, and perspectives of marginalized groups, specifically LGBTQ plus individuals. Good news out of Washington.
Yes, and that is that's where I'm based. I'm
Yes.
based in Seattle, and so it's so great to see this. I'm actually this is particularly meaningful because I'm trained as a historian, and so I know
Mm,
how important it is to be able for students, for people to see ourselves in the histories that we are taught in
yeah.
school. I think that I think about my partner's child who identifies as who's non-binary, and to be
Mm,
able for them to see themselves in the histories that they're being taught in schools is really meaningful.
yeah.
And I'll also say that in Washington, this is the coming after requiring histories about Indigenous people, about enslaved people, and I hope what will come next is also requiring to teach about Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and
Mhm.
Pacific Islander, because that was actually something that Make Us Visible, which is a advocacy organization, tried to get passed this year, didn't pass this year. Hopefully, it will pass next year because this bill is quite a sign of just more progress towards that.
Absolutely. Well, when it passes, because it will, I'll make sure I put it in 5 things. It will be back. Maybe I'll have you back on the show to talk about it when it passes. All right. The second story this week is about a huge ROI in childcare benefits. There's a recent study done by the Boston Consulting Group and Moms First, which found that for every dollar invested in childcare benefits, employers see returns ranging from 90 cents to $4.25 through reduced absenteeism and attrition. Yet only 12% of employees have access to these benefits. So I'm hoping that we start to see some companies catch on. Some of the companies mentioned in the story were UPS, Etsy, and Steamboat that are doing some really great things where they're seeing this ROI.
I'm really encouraged to see that these companies are making the investment, and also they're doing the study, that this study has
Yeah.
come out, because this really speaks to the business community. And yet I also think it shouldn't be private companies' responsibilities to do this. I mean, we actually need to have a much more
Yeah.
national effort. The how much money people have to spend on childcare and where the US spends compared to the rest of the world. I think I read a stat, rich countries spend about 14,000, the US spends $500
Ah,
a year. And so
insane.
and this is, I mean, I don't have children, and yet I feel we need to be investing in the future workforce. This isn't just about productivity and lack of reducing absences today. This is about investing in the workforce for tomorrow. So I'm really hopeful, and I also think there's so much room for more.
That's the well, that's always the theme here,
Yes,
Julie.
yes.
There's always so much room for more,
Mhm.
but we do celebrate the wins, and I hope that this data has an impact. You know, whether and I do not have hope that we're going to see any sort of federal funding or state funding at any sort of scale, but I appreciate when companies try to fill in these gaps because, of course, this disproportionately affects people of color. All right. The third story this week is about Hop, the first animated show with a cast of characters who all have some type of disability. That show debuts on Max this week. And the show is led by Hop, a frog with a shorter leg, and has friends like Philippa, a neurodivergent squirrel. But what's very cool is that the voice actors include a double amputee and a person with autism. So there's a lot of authenticity because the voice actors actually are authentically represented.
Yes, I loved hearing this because so much of our education starts when we're young, what children
Yeah.
learn and see, this is going to affect them for the rest of their life. I also think as adults, we need it too. And
Yeah.
I want to share the show that's really changed the way I think about autism, which is on Amazon Prime, As We See It. And that's also, I think, the first show that's acted all by actors with autism. And so just giving another recommendation too.
Yeah, I haven't even heard of that one, so I'll have to check it out. What's the general like theme?
It's just comedy drama. It's heartwarming. It's about these
Alright.
roommates who live together and how they navigate the world, and it's really helped me understand autism so much more.
All right, cool. Well, I'll have to check it out. Thank you for the recommendation. All right, the fourth story this week is about how the US government is expanding race and ethnicity options on federal forms, including the next census. So additions include a Middle Eastern or North African category where these folks had to previously identify as white, and a reformulation of the Hispanic and Latino categories. They're also testing sexual orientation and gender identity in the next American Community Survey for possible inclusion. So this is a really big deal to have more accurate data.
I find the census categorization so fascinating because they will always change, and it really shows
Yeah.
how race is socially constructed and how we think about
Mhm.
it changes. And so, I read somewhere that after the 2020 census, half of people thought, hey, these categories don't represent me. And honestly,
Mhm.
Burnett, I don't think that's going to get any better. And I think that's actually just because we have more ways of thinking about our identity. There's much more
Yeah.
complexity. So, will we be able to ever capture? I don't think so. I think, and I am really happy though for Arab Americans who will now not be categorized as white. I think that's a
Mhm.
major progress.
It is, it is. I just think that, yeah, I mean, we need to know
Mhm,
who I mean, this is about being able to make better policy decisions. I mean, there's so much impact here, resource allocation, hopefully the addressing of systemic inequalities, I hope. So, we need better data even as it continues to
mhm,
evolve.
mhm.
All right. The fifth story this week is about the Yurok tribe, which reclaimed 125 acres of land near Redwood National and State Parks, which is a historic return after 90% of their land was taken during the California gold rush. So they became the first tribal nation to co manage land with the National Park Service,
Well, I can't wait to visit
right?
the new sites because to visit and to know that it's the form but from the tribe there will be really I'm just really excited for that personally. And then also what this means for other tribes that what might be able to enter into these co-management with the National Park Service is also really exciting, and with other government agencies as well. It's I think this opens up a lot more opportunities.
Yeah, I think so as well, to have that sort of precedent set. So there was a historic memorandum of understanding signed by the tribe, the Redwood National and State Parks, and the nonprofit Save the Redwoods League. So it's kind of a joint effort. And there's going to be a Yurok village, a cultural center, trails, and salmon habitat restoration. So it's meaningful. It actually is meaningful. All right. Well, Julie, thank you so much for joining me this week. It has been an absolute treat having you. How can folks get in touch with you?
I'm really active on LinkedIn, so you can find me at on LinkedIn, Julie Pham PhD, or you can also find Curiosity Based. And I also have a website for the book called formsofrespect.com.
Awesome. Well, folks, check that out. We'll make sure it gets put in the show notes as well. This week's call to action. Sunday was Transgender Day of Visibility, celebrated each year on March 31st. And my good friend Rhodes Perry created a checklist on how to show up for your transgender and gender expansive colleagues. So, this great professional and personal resource will be in the show notes. So, you can check that out. And of course, check out rhodesperry.com. Folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.